Alright guys, I am here with Brit Girl in the UK to provide some clarity about the current climate in Britain, the climate of tyranny and fear in Joseph Stalin-run United Kingdom. I'm sorry, I meant Theresa May.
Yeah, fascist UK.
The fascist UK. What times there are. It's 2018, but it feels like 1984.
It does indeed.
So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the climate there, because I want everyone in America to understand the climate of fear that I could only imagine.
Yeah, it's pretty scary now, I have to say, especially as somebody who is a dissident voice. I mean, obviously I'm nowhere near the scale of Tommy Robinson, but I mean, I've been attacked from day one since I started to speak out. I've had countless Facebook and Twitter profiles taken off me. I'm permanently banned on Twitter. I've had £3,500 worth of YouTube revenue stolen when they deemed my video hate speech and deleted it 2 days before my revenue was due. And then they decided a week later that it wasn't hate speech and let me put the video back up, but never got the revenue. It's just, and you have little things like when you go to protests, they're using signal blockers, so you can't live stream, so you can't get the information out there. They shut down basically anyone who doesn't toe the left fascist line. They are attacking at every opportunity and trying to silence us, just to make it that bit harder every time to keep going. And they know exactly what they're doing. And Tommy Robinson, I don't, if you see, I'm really confused with Tommy Robinson and his arrest, because the government will know the backlash and how the public will feel about it. So part of me either thinks they're either trying to silence him, and part of me thinks they're actually trying to poke us with a stick, just to see how we're going to react, just to see how engaged people really are and whether we do care. So I kind of get the feeling like they're poking at us with a big stick, like the hornet's nest, just to see if we're going to respond. And it's worrying times in Britain right now, and all across Europe. But yeah, Britain, especially considering what an incredible society we have, a free and democratic society, and it's been eroded over the last, well, probably 10 to 15 years, but they've really ramped up the speed in the last 18 months to 2 years with the migrant invasion. I'm not going to call them refugees because they're not. But any dissident voices who speak out against what's happening across Europe are silenced immediately, and it's genuinely worrying times right now.
Yeah, you know, I like how you put that they are poking you with a stick like it's creeping tyranny. I was watching Sargon of Akkad because I wanted to see what he had to say about Tommy Robinson, about the whole situation, and I was a little bit taken aback because Sargon of Akkad he's clearly a very brave guy. He reports on Antifa, he reports on Islam, and anyone who's reported on them knows there is an inherent danger because these are very violent ideologies, communism and Islam, the unholy alliance. But Sargon of Akkad's not afraid to report on that. But he is afraid to report on Tommy Robinson's arrest when the government issues a gag order, because it goes to show that no amount of thuggery, not even Islam, not even communist Antifa, can match the threat that is always present from tyrannical government, because government has a monopoly over the use of force. So Sargon of Akkad will fight back against Antifa, but once tyrannical government comes in, there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and I mean, people think that Britain is, we have justice and great legal system. We don't. We actually have, and it's quite shaming, but we actually have an awful lot of secret court cases that happen in Britain. People who just disappear and are locked up for years, and people never hear about them. They never get a trial. They never go to court. They never get any charges. They're just put in prison and held indefinitely. And these are British citizens who mostly, I've found, speak out against the paedophile within the foster care and social government childcare industry. We hear of people who have been locked up for decades for daring to try and draw attention to it. And I mean, this is a very real threat that people face in Britain. I mean, it's becoming a bit like North Korea here, I have to say. And literally the government can just come and take you and put you in jail, and no one will ever see you again. And it's very little known that this happens in Britain, but the secret courts happen here quite frequently, and they're quite scary.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is something I would have expected to read in The Great Terror regarding Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. And I hope you could put into perspective how scary that is, because I think people in the United States were protected by the First Amendment. We still get fair trials. They have been spoiled by these protections to the point where they're not standing up and fighting as these protections are eroded. Do you feel and I mean, I tip my cap, you have more courage than me, tremendous courage. Do you feel that people are afraid to even speak up in Britain? I mean, what are people saying?
People are terrified. People are losing their jobs, they're losing their homes for speaking out. People are being shamed, children are being, people who dare to take their children to protest marches are having social services involved, being labelled as right-wing fascists, and having social services involved with their children. These are really very real threats, and I know people will say, yeah, but if people don't speak out in 10 to 15 years, it's going to get worse, which is true. But these are people's lives, and of course people are scared. I was scared when I started. Me speaking out happened by accident. I was so angry one day that I kept being blocked for asking why being opposed to Islam is far right. And why standing up for freedom and democracy and for women's rights was far right. Nobody could answer this question. I kept getting blocked by senior ups in the political parties, and so I just posted a rant one day called The Unanswerable Question, and it went viral. And from that, it was, I just thought a few people might have seen it on a couple of forums, but I think it got 3.5 million views in about 3 weeks with this video. My Facebook exploded, Twitter exploded, and that's how Brit was born. So it wasn't really a conscious decision for me to speak out, but it's like opening Pandora's box. Once you're out there and your face is out there, you can't really go back in and not do anything. And my own moral conscience won't allow me to. I have children. I have their futures to worry about. If it was just me, I'd pack a bag and come to America. I genuinely would. But I have a duty and a right. I've brought children into this world, and I have to stand up for them. I have to speak for their futures. I suppose I have a bigger God than most people, so I have that bit of confidence that allows me to put myself out there and speak. But for the most part, the general public opinion, I speak to a lot of people on a very daily basis, and I'm amazed at just how many people have the exact same political beliefs, but they are just terrified to speak out. They're scared to lose their jobs, they're scared to lose their houses, their children. And these are very real fears that we're facing. And I think if they say that if the punishment for leaving Islam wasn't apostasy, it would collapse within a week or so. And the same here in Britain. If we went under a tyrannical threat of being thrown in prison for our opinions, a hell of a lot more people would be speaking out right now. But there is a real genuine fear in Britain for people's livelihoods and their safety. And that's why people don't speak out.
Yeah, I love the comparison you made that people are afraid to speak out because their lives can be destroyed, just like Islam would fall apart if people were allowed to leave. I want people to understand, because when you say, oh, you can't criticize Islam, right? If you criticize Islam, it's hate speech. Well, you could say it's hate speech, but what about all the moderates within the religion of Islam who want to criticize the religion, but if they do, they are potentially murdered? So it's not hate speech to criticize the religion, it's just criticizing bad ideas, repressive ideas. And the same thing happens once the government starts acting the same way as Islam, where more and more people, moderates who might speak up, whereas in Islam they might speak up, but they won't because they might be murdered. they won't speak up against the tyrannical government of Britain because if they do, they might be thrown in a prison cell.
Yeah, and that's the very real threat we're facing right now. And it's so frustrating because I'm from a town called Bradford, which is in the north of England, which was one of the first to get a Muslim population. So we're going back sort of 40, 50 years. And I grew up there, and it was I noticed it very early on when I was 5 or 6 that I was in the minority back then, and now you're really in the minority. I can't go back to my hometown. They have Sharia patrols. It's pretty much 99% Pakistani Muslim now, and this is a major city. They have a super mosque which has space for 3,000 worshippers. They have 300 mosques in one city, which is my hometown. And I've seen how it spreads and it grows. And to begin with, yes, there are moderate Muslims, and they fit in quite nicely in the community. Most of my friends growing up were Muslim children, and we all had a very good sense of community. I had no issues. But then the Wahhabi and the Salafi and the Deobandi strains, they move in and they start making the mosques more conservative and start inflicting more modesty laws on the community. And it's not the moderates that have to be worried about, as that saying, Bitchute Gabriel says it beautifully. You look at Germany and Japan, there were millions of moderates, but they were irrelevant. It's the ones who shout the loudest who are the problem, and they happen to be the radicals and the extremists, and they then get their roots into a community, and that's when it becomes more conservative. And when they start putting the Sharia law and Sharia, we have 185 Sharia councils in Britain now doling out Islamic punishment, separate from the British Council. And this is the problem, is because it creeps in, it's creeping Sharia. And this is what's happened with the tyranny in Britain. They've slowly eroded our rights away. And it's happening, and it's like creeping tyranny. So we've kind of got two battles going on in Britain right now. And they sort of overtake each other as to which is the most important one to deal with at any one given time. But we have two very huge and very massive problems that we're facing over here right now. And I honestly don't see much of a solution or anything other than civil war happening in Britain.
Yeah, I did a video just on that topic because in America we're kind of brazen because the Second Amendment, and we have something like 380 million guns on the streets, and you could only imagine how many fucking bullets we have out here. So if the government wants to go there, if they want to, the deep state wants to keep taking control, violent revolution is always an option. And in the book Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley, if you want to understand this world government, he talks about the history of human civilization, and what he states in his studies of human civilization is that when there have been populations that have a weaponry at least close to what the governments have, at least where they can fight off their governments, there have been free populations. And whenever that has not been the case, it has only led to tyranny, enslavement, and lack of prosperity for all people, regardless of race, color, or creed.
Yeah, history just keeps repeating itself. Nobody ever learns. Everyone seems to be that arrogant that they think they can do it better than the last time. But, excuse me, I mean, it's a hard one, because, I mean, then you look at the pendulum always swings the other way, doesn't it? I mean, when there's a great evil in the world, it has to correct itself, and it always has. But there's so much bad now that I don't see how it can possibly correct itself without a hell of a lot of people dying, an awful lot of people dying, and the demographic and the traditions and the values of Britain and Europe will change immeasurably forever.
Yeah, I'm glad you said history repeats itself, because this is something that we hear a lot. It's something I myself say a lot, and it's true. It's true in a sense. People think history repeats itself, and they say, for instance, in the United States of America, well, there was slavery, and that was done by white people, so white people are oppressors, white people are bad. But that's not the way that history repeats itself. History repeats itself in that human behavior repeats itself, human psychology repeats itself, and that in methods of accumulating wealth and power that are used by elites are recycled and used again, so that repeats itself. But with that, we could also learn from ways people fought back against tyranny in history. And to me, what I would do if I didn't have the guns, because you get a lot of tough guys out there. I see them commenting on my post, and they say, "Screw that, we need violent revolution." Listen, I'm all for that. There's a time for violent revolution, but not when violent revolution will lead to you being crushed and the mainstream media using propaganda to convince the rest of the public that you're a right-wing terrorist. You lose, lose, lose. I like to have a game plan where you win, win, win. So when I hear that history repeats itself, I look back and say, how did unarmed populations defeat tyrannical government? And I look back in the United States of America and I see Martin Luther King, how he defeated the tyrannical government at the time of the United States of America. And what he realized is that they were outgunned. So what he had to do is take the moral high ground. So he looked through history himself, and from Gandhi, he came up with this idea of civil disobedience. And he said, we're going to protest in a very public way and make the media cover it. And when the police get very violent, and they did, they brought out hoses, they released dogs and ripped people apart, they beat people with batons. He said, whatever you do, do not hit them back. And sure enough, in a decade, the country had gone from being completely against these civil rights to overwhelmingly in favor of the civil rights movement. You have to know how to take a moral high ground, and you could learn that from Martin Luther King, you could learn that from Gandhi, but you need a leader who is able to articulate that to the masses and get the masses to follow them. And I fear that that leader right now might be locked in prison for 13 months.
Sadly, yes, I agree. But it's the worrying thing though is we've put Tommy on such a pedestal, and everyone sort of hides behind him as their sort of mouthpiece. They think, well, Tommy's saying it for us, so we don't have to. And it sort of it enables people to be apathetic and uninvolved, I think. And perhaps now with Tommy locked away, it might spur people on a little more to perhaps try and fill the void while he's away, which is what I'm hoping. But with regard to civil disobedience, I've always said this from day one. The best way that we can get the government to sit up and listen and to make an impact that's non-violent is to block the motorways peacefully with our cars, get thousands of people out in their cars to just block all the main routes. London, there's a road that runs all the way around it called the M25. If we blocked that, London would be at a standstill. The economy would suffer massively. It would lose millions in just a day. And that is the only way the government is ever going to sit up and listen, is when we hit them in the pockets. Because we're nothing to them. We're the crap on the end of their shoe. But if we start hitting them where they actually care, which is financially, and we start affecting the stock markets and trade and stopping supplies getting in and out of the city, then they're going to have to sit up and take note. And I've always thought that would be the most efficient and the quickest way to get any attention from the government, really. They certainly couldn't tow thousands of cars away and lock up thousands of people, could they? So... But yeah, I've always thought that is. I mean, we are sitting ducks here. We cannot have a revolution, a violent one, because we would just be slaughtered in minutes. They'd get the army out and we'd be done. It's not an option for us here. We have no guns. We have no means to defend ourselves. So peaceful rebellion is the only alternative, really.
Yeah, and the beauty of that is that tyrants only know tyranny. So their reaction to peaceful demonstration will always be to escalate, because it's where their power comes from, it's all they know. So then when you get the media covering this, the modern day, you have everyone live streaming this, and you get the pictures of police who are government physically attacking peaceful protesters, physically arresting peaceful protesters, you're able to take back the moral high ground. And it also leads to people asking the question, what are these protests over? And then they say, oh, it's over Tommy Robinson's arrest. He was arrested for covering a pedophilia scandal that the media hasn't reported on much, and that the government, I kind of hear the government was involved in. Can you tell the people in America a little just how in depth, how far back this pedophilia scandal goes, and specifically the government's role within the grooming scandal?
Yeah, it breaks my heart. It's rage-inducing, it's infuriating, it's heartbreaking all at the same time. But basically, the government have known for at least the last 40 years that gangs of majority Pakistani Muslim men have been grooming and raping young white British and Sikh girls for the past 40 years. They're a Labour councillor. Now, Labour in Britain is the equivalent of the Democrats, so they're the Liberals, the lefties. And a Labour councillor by the name of Sarah Campion, she exposed this paedophile ring, scandal, and her reports implies that up to 1 million British girls over the past 40 years have been systematically raped and abused by Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. They've been plied with drugs and alcohol and passed around like a beer from dirty old man to dirty old man for years. For years. They've had pregnancies and abortions, they've been tortured, they've been raped over and over again. And the government have known about it, the police have known about it, and they have covered it up for the fear of looking racist. And so many lives have been destroyed. It broke with the story of Rotherham, where 1,400 girls that they know of so far have come forward as victims of these grooming gangs. That's 1,400 little girls who've been raped and beaten and abused and tortured and burned and chained and branded and whipped and had the most horrific things done to them while they're still children, and the police have done nothing. Now, so far we know that there are these gangs operating still in 79 towns in Britain. They're still working, they're still operational, they're still raping children, and still the police are doing nothing. There are gag orders put on in court cases to stop people reporting on it, and this is where Tommy Robinson comes in. He was reporting a case in Canterbury a few months ago when he was arrested because there was a gag order on the case. He was arrested and charged, and he was given a suspended sentence, so released. And then when the new case came up again this week
what was he arrested and charged for, if you don't mind?
So, because he was reporting on a case that had a gag order on it. That was the first time he was arrested for, I don't know what the specific charge is, but it's for data.
So he was arrested for reporting on a pedophilia scandal that essentially had been covered up by the government of Britain.
Yeah. This is what he does. He goes to all the court cases and exposes just the sheer number of men and the charges. So this week, last Friday, when he went to the court case in Leeds, that again had a gag order on it. There were 29 men with 170 charges pertaining to, I believe it was 19 girls from the age of 11 years old that had been raped by this group of 29, and Tommy was there to report on it. Now, his original charge said that he wasn't allowed to film within the court property. So when you see the video of him being arrested, he's actually asking the police officer, is this the court property? Can I stand here? Because he's standing on the street. He's not on the physical court. He was very peaceful, no bother. He was there for an hour before the police arrested him for breach of the peace. That's what they said that the charge was breach of the peace. Now, there was no breach of the peace, so the original charge was bogus. He was then taken to the court, he was put before a judge, and he was sentenced. His suspended sentence from his previous, he was sent to jail for that, and they tapped on a little bit extra for this time as well. So this is what the government do. They put away people who report on paedophilia, and they allow the paedophiles and the rapists to go free. This is where we are now at in 2018 in Britain.
and understand that they always go after the big fish. So they go after Tommy Robinson because they want everyone else to see it. They want Brit Girl to see it. They want Sargon of Akkad to see it, to say, don't you dare report on this pedophilia. And can you elaborate to people here in the States why the government of Britain wouldn't want the pedophilia scandal reported on because Muslims were involved?
The Muslims are involved. Well, there's many theories as to why they're covering up. Mostly the Muslims, but there's an awful lot of, I'm sure, like there is in America with Dems, there's an awful lot of paedophiles within the party themselves. We believe that they're obviously just working theories, but from the people who are being arrested, there's police officers in there, there's counsellors in there, so it's probably more likely that this has been covered up for decades because the government and police and the counsellors have also been abusing these girls, and it's probably quite likely that the Muslim suspects, the people they're arresting, have dirt on the police officers and the counsellors and the MPs, and that's why they're getting away with either pathetic sentences or no sentences at all. And that's what's believed in Britain. It's the what is so far in now, and particularly with paedophiles. We have 45 convicted paedophiles who are actually active in the Labour Party right now. Convicted paedophiles.
Hooey. Yeah,
there's a website for it. And they're all know their charges. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could go a little past even working theory. I know Edward Heath, who was the former Prime Minister of Britain, for my people here in the States, that is their version of the President of the United States. I mean, can you imagine if we now found out that, I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if we now, I mean, I'm not saying it, I wouldn't be very surprised if you, I don't know, follow Jeffrey Epstein, but could you imagine if we found out here in the States that Bill Clinton had raped 20, 25, 30 young boys? I'm talking 10, 12. Yes, indeed, that would be quite the scandal. Well, we know that happened in the UK, which is fucking remarkable. But for those of you who only recently started following, I broke onto the scene in two ways. First, I did an 8-part documentary on the still unsolved murder of Democratic staffer Seth Rich. So if you want to look into that and where the Russia narrative comes from, that's it.
Russia, it's all the Russians.
Always the Russians. And the second thing I broke in on is pedophilia. So there has been a great deal. There has been over 10 mayors who have been arrested and charged with pedophilia in the United States in just the last 18 months. And there is a tremendous amount of known pedophilia within government. So Dennis Hastert, who was the former Speaker of the House in the United States of America, that's very high up in the American government, he has now been outed for raping over 20 boys, just like Edward Heath. And Jerry Sandusky, are you familiar with Sandusky?
No, he's not one. I know most of the others you've mentioned, but no, I don't know who he is.
So Jerry Sandusky was a football coach at Penn State University. And it turned out that he liked to spend his free time raping young boys in a locker room. He'd invite them, come to Penn State University, we'll show you the locker room, and I'll rape you. Oh. And so this story broke, and the mainstream media, they killed him, right? They killed Sandusky, just like they like to kill Harvey Weinstein after he's caught, right? Not when they know it's happening, but after he's caught. And he's arrested, goes to jail for 50 years. That's great, right? Well, as it turns out, I actually did a little research, and Jerry Sandusky, and I have a whole report on this, was a member of a pedophile ring led by billionaire Ed Savitz that included members of high-ranking officials, Lawrence King, many others, Dennis Hastert, within the American government power structure who were part of this pedophile ring. And the mainstream media was aware of this, but they just said he was a lone wolf. And it shows you just how widespread these pedophilia networks are, that Their tentacles reach into everything. They reach into the media. They reach into the police. They reach into the highest level of the American government. They reach into the highest level of the British government. And the Vatican, the Deputy Pope, if you haven't read on that story, the Deputy Pope, the third in command.
I know about the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah. The third in command in the Vatican is now facing charges for raping over 100 young boys. So this
I'm not surprised if the Pope got dragged out as well at some point. They're all complicit in it. It's disgusting.
Have you ever looked into his eyes?
Oh, it's evil, isn't it? It's pure evil. You can look at some people and they're just soulless. Theresa May's one of those people, and Angela Merkel. When you look at them, they're just soulless, empty vessels of nothing. And these are the people who are running the world. It's genuinely terrifying. It really is.
You know what they like to say? Hail Mother Merkel.
Yeah, she's just awful. She's just awful. I mean, all of our European, you look at the European government and there's not a decent one among them. There's really not. I mean, in Britain, we have one saving grace, and that's a guy called Jacob Rees-Mogg. And he is the most upper-class British toff you could ever imagine. He went to Eton and Cambridge, and he is just wonderful. He's the only man with a shred of decency or integrity or morals. The rest of them are self-indulgent, self-important, narcissistic, revolting bunch of cretinous filth. That's all I can say, is that's who's running the world in all of our governments. And I mean, how do you even begin to take out so much rot? When it's so insidious and it's literally everywhere. How do you even begin to tackle it when it's managed to wheedle its way into every area of society? I mean, we got charities and groups, and they're all coming. There's scandals within them, and I mean, there's literally, who do you trust now? You can't trust the government, you can't trust the police, you can't trust pretty much anyone now. So where do you turn? And how do we begin to deal with this problem? That's what keeps me awake at night.
Yeah, well, you know, the United Nations, it just got released about a month or two ago, I read, that they've covered up thousands of child rapes with their humanitarian organizations.
Well, look who runs them. I mean, who's in charge of the UN? Saudi. They are 70% Saudi run is the UN. That's all you need to know. It's an absolute joke. I mean, we're supposed to have the Human Rights Act. Article 19 of the Human Rights Act says that everyone has the right to express their opinion, be it on politics, religion, anything, be it on the paper, online, in a book, without fear of reprisal. And this is a global article for the whole world. And yet here's Tommy Robinson in prison for expressing his opinions. And Count Dankula, I don't know if you heard about him, who had the Nazi dog, the pug dog that did the Nazi salute. And people are literally being hauled up to prison for jokes and for reporting.
Which was hilarious, by the way.
It's hilarious for us watching it. It's not hilarious for him, who was 2 years of his life was spent wondering whether he was going to go to prison for posting a joke on YouTube. You imagine the stress he went through, and the sleepless nights and the worry and having to go to court. And in Scottish court, there's no jury. It's just a judge. You're at the mercy of one person, and it's up to whether they like you and what their political leanings are as to what your judgment will be. And this is how the corruption is setting in. And it's quite scary now. Yeah,
and you know what really pissed me off about Count Dankula's situation is the way in which people defended it. So I heard a lot of people come out and say, oh, well, he shouldn't be put in prison because this was clearly just a joke. But by doing that, by making that argument, we are conceding that it's okay to censor a certain type of speech because people in power deem it to be hate speech. But as I've explained ad nauseum with feminism, with the wage gap, and with most easily explained with Islam, it's very easy for one person to interpret something as hate speech and another person to say that it's not hate speech. So what happens is whoever is in power decides what hate speech is. So as the example, if you criticize the radical adherence to the religion of Islam, if you're Tommy Robinson and you say, I don't think it's okay that if women take off their burqa, that under Sharia law they can be raped. Well, the British government might come along and say that's hate speech. But to a moderate Muslim within the religion who might want to reform, who wants to say that, I think that we should reform our religion and that women should be able to take off their burqas, well, someone who adheres to the religion who follows the literal interpretation of Sharia says what you just said is hate speech, so we should be able to silence you. So if you're letting any speech be silenced, in the end, it's going to be you who pays for it. And so many people don't understand that, and not enough people have the courage or the intellect or whatever it might be to even make these arguments, and it pisses me off.
Yeah, it does. I did a video about free speech because it's something. It doesn't matter what side of the argument you fall on, if you're left or right. I hate labels, left and right and all this. I'm just common sense. I'm not left or right. I'm just common sense. And it doesn't matter which side you think you're on. Free speech should be the one thing that unites everybody. Because the minute free speech is gone, we are absolutely at the mercy of the government. These lefties, they might think it's all fun and games while right-wingers are being locked up. But who are they going to come for after the nasty right-wingers have been put away? It's going to be the dissenting voices on the left. And this is what they don't understand. They're that stupid. They can't get their head around the basic concept that popular speech doesn't need protection. Free speech laws are there to protect controversial speech. Otherwise it wouldn't be necessary. You wouldn't need free speech laws if everybody just stuck to the popular opinion. And free speech is the absolute cornerstone of any civilized society. If you're not allowed to critically to question and to ask questions and to criticize and to question what you're being taught, then societies don't develop, they don't grow, there's no imagination, there's no creativity, because everything that you do fits inside a neat little box. And without free speech, you can't go outside that box, you can't explore, you can't learn. And it's truly terrifying that there's a whole generation of kids think that if you have a variant opinion from their opinion, that you are sort of evil and wrong and hateful. And it's quite magnificent when you look at the indoctrination of how they've managed to manipulate and brainwash so many teenagers and early 20s and 30s. It's quite magnificent how they've managed to orchestrate it and to convince a society that everything that was once good is now bad, and everything that we were taught was bad is now to be lauded and to upheld and to be put on a pedestal. And that's the part I can't get my head around, is that morality has it's decayed beyond all recognition to when I grew up. I don't recognise this world now. It's flipped 180, and it's quite magnificent how they've managed to achieve it. It's terrifying and spectacular at the same time.
Yeah, it shows the power of giving the government centralized control over our education systems, because as soon as you allow the government to have say over curriculum, to be able to leverage schooling systems through federal grants or whatever it might be, you are giving those in power who have only an agenda to gain more wealth and power for themselves, because we all agree. I mean, even these lost liberals and progressives and social justice warriors, if you ask them if their local congressperson is doing a good job, I mean, in the United States, the Congress has 9% approval rating. Yet these people will viciously fight to give these very corrupt people, they know are corrupt, they will give these people the right to control what we're allowed to say. And until we take back the education systems all over the world and decentralize them, it's going to continue to be an uphill battle because right now we have to wake people in their 20s. And it would be much easier if we could just teach them from a young age why free speech is important and why hate speech is always in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Yeah, like I say, there's so many strings to this puppet, if it were. I mean, we've got feminism, we've got the Marxist indoctrination, we've got universities teaching this, and we've got the government with their rules. I mean, there's so many strings all pulling at these kids. And then we've got the debt trap from, I mean, in Britain, student loans from the age of 18. I mean, they're literally starting their life off in debt. So they're already beholden to the government before they've even started their adult life. The welfare state, taking fathers away. All of these things have contributed to the downfall of society. And to correct them all would just be such a mammoth job now. I don't know how it could even be corrected. I don't know. This is the thing. I don't know where Britain goes from here, other than civil unrest, civil war, and the eventual killing of thousands. Because people have been that brainwashed to be apathetic to their own destruction. It's scary to see people sitting there just accepting what's happening in Britain. Not just accepting it, but welcoming it. Like they've been brainwashed to accept their own destruction. And how do you fight that sort of brainwashing when it's that deep-rooted that they loathe themselves for the colour of their skin or for whatever reason? How do you unindoctrinate these thousands of people to get them to realise that the government doesn't give a shit about them? The government is actively trying to destroy their lives and our civilization. And sometimes I just think, I'll just go down the pub and drink a load of tequila because it's such a huge task. And I do wonder if sometimes I should have just kept my mouth shut and lived my life quietly, but then that's not my nature, really.
Yeah, I think it's funny because in spite of all those obstacles you just brought up, you guys did it. In spite of all that indoctrination, you guys voted for Brexit to leave the European Union. Can you elaborate on what has happened since that vote for my people here stateside?
Absolutely nothing's happened. That's what's happened. It's Brexit. I think the only reason Brexit won was because the government were that arrogant that they thought that the plebs and the little people were that stupid that we were going to lap up all the crap they told us about how wonderful the EU was. So they didn't need to rig the vote because they thought we were going to vote Remain anyway. And I think they were genuinely shocked when we woke up on June 24th and Leave had won. The nation I was in shock. I've been an avid Brexit supporter for years. And even I thought there's no chance. There's no way we're going to vote to leave. And I've never been so elated as when I woke up on that morning and saw that we had voted to leave the EU. But the problem is voting to leave and actually leaving are two very different things. And since we voted 2 years ago, 2 years, we are no further, we are no closer to leaving. The government will not let us leave the EU. We have signed up to treaties and declarations. We have committed to the downfall of Europe, and they will do everything they can to stop us little people getting our democratic will. They are filibustering and making excuses at every opportunity to stop us leaving. And so if we don't leave, there's going to be riots over that as well. So there's Britain at the minute is just a boiling pot, and it's going to boil over with something any day now, really.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand that becoming part of a global body like the European Union has taken away all of the power that the British people have, because Britain voted to leave the European Union, and right now it doesn't appear that that's happening. And in fact, George Soros, our good old buddy who Roseanne makes conspiracy theories about, George Soros is funding a movement now for a second Brexit vote. Well, you could continue to vote over any issue until you get the vote that you want. That's not a vote, it's a show. It's like asking your kids to vote over where they want to go on vacation, and then you just keep having them vote time and time again until they go where you already bought the plane tickets.
Oh yeah, they are. George Soros, after Mohammed, is probably the most evil person to ever have walked the earth. He is an evil, vicious little man. He's the puppet master, him and the Rothschilds and all those. But Brexit, they have been pushing for a second referendum. But the problem is again, I don't think they've read the will of the people or the atmosphere in Britain right now. They misjudged us on the first vote. We voted to leave. And I believe if they were to push for a second referendum, without rigging involved, it would be a greater leave vote the second time around. Because a lot more people have woken up since the last Brexit vote. They've seen, first of all, that none of the fear-mongering and the doom and gloom and the end-of-the-world predictions that would happen if we were to vote to leave have actually come to pass. So first of all, they know that that's all a load of crap. And second of all, a lot of people, regardless of whether they're left or right, they still believe in democracy. And we voted to leave, and people are starting to realise that the government are trying to withhold the will of the people. So they would vote to leave purely for that reason the second time around. So I think it would backfire greatly if they had a second referendum. But I don't think there will be. I just don't think we're going to leave. I think there's going to be a catastrophic event in Europe or Britain, and that is going to be the reason for the start of the European army, the EU army, and that will be the end of Brexit. The only reason they want an EU army is to control the citizens of Europe. It's not to compete on the world stage. We have NATO for that. An EU army has no place or purpose. The only reason an EU army needs to exist is to control the citizens of Europe, because the British army won't shoot British citizens, but the Spanish army will, or the French, and the British army would be sent over to Germany or to France to shoot their citizens. It's purely to control the people who live here. And that's my prediction, is that something catastrophic is going to happen, a massive event that's going to manipulate the people to stay in the EU and to form the EU army, and then it's good night Vienna.
Well, you can be rest assured that the irredeemable basket of deplorables is still strong in the United States.
What we need you to do is start sending over guns just piece by piece, just one bit at a time. A
little bit of international gun running.
Just a trigger and then the barrel.
Nothing to see here. But yeah, I do think it's when my grandfather, my grandparents' generation, World War II, my grandfather knew what to do. The Nazis were clearly bad. They were attacking sovereign nations and physically trying to conquer them. And he volunteered and he went and fought in World War II. And the spread of communism was clearly a bad thing. An Iron Curtain was going to descend over the world. It was descending over Eastern Europe. Just look at the contrast between East and Western Germany. And you know everything you need to know about freedom, capitalism versus communist systems. And my father, he took up the same calling. It might not have been a good war, and they might have lied to get us into it. But he volunteered to go to Vietnam when he was 18 because at least he understood that there was an enemy that was worth fighting in the spread of communism. Not saying the war was just, thus that the idea of fighting communism was just. And today, people can't see the enemy because the nature of how the enemy attacks is different. JFK, before his coup d'etat, before he was killed in the United States of America, gave a secret society speech. And he tried to explain to people how communism was advancing throughout the world. And he explained that communism was advancing through subversion, through infiltration, through covert means. And the way we are being conquered today, but we're not told this because the education system has been taken over by the Marxists and everything else, is we are being conquered through these global unions. The European Union is designed not to provide a prosperous Europe, but to take away the individual sovereignty of nations within Europe so that people's votes don't matter. And when your vote doesn't matter, you are no different than a slave. That's why they do one currency with the euro. They try to do the Amero. This is why they push the TPP and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Because when there are multilateral trade deals and there are disputes between nations, maybe one nation like Britain wants to pull out, something of that nature, it goes to global courts. And what those global courts rule become law within your nation. So the strategy of conquest from the Marxists is not through open warfare, but it has been through subversion, as Kennedy warned, through infiltration, through covert means. But these things, these global pacts, are sold to us to create peace. But what is the good of having peace if everyone in the world is not at peace with the global government because they are slaves to tyrants? Because if the global government was in place, then I couldn't have reported on Tommy Robinson's arrest from the United States. If the global government was in place, the spy state would be so out of control, like in China, where anyone who says anything against the government is picked up within 2 minutes because the biometrics are everywhere. If you walk out on the street, it picks up your eye iris, it picks up your fingerprints when you touch something, and you're getting arrested. And the more we centralize power, the more we are dooming humanity to becoming enslaved to tyrants. So to me, the answer to your question, what do we do against all this power, is we do everything within our means to decentralize that power. So we continue to fight for Brexit, because if you get it, you get your sovereignty back to at least within the country of Britain. And once it's back in the country, you could get it back to the local level. You take away power from the federal level, and if you do that, now politicians have to fear their constituents, because the will of the constituents could have those politicians removed. And it's always the decentralization how you create power, because with decentralization becomes less of a focus on the collective and more of a focus on the individual. And when the individual is empowered, freedom will reign, prosperity will reign throughout the entire world. Hey guys, thanks for watching part 1 of my interview with Brit Girl. We will be releasing part 2 tomorrow, so look out for that. And if you want to help fight back against tyrannical government and support individual liberty, you could support us both on Patreon for as little as $1 monthly.